Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we are in the business of talking about Psalm 145. Just 5 Psalms left to go. And if you want the free PDF outline, you can download it at tobelikechrist.com, totally for free. Just wanted to say thank you to everybody who has sent in support, either through the Patreon account or there's a way now through YouTube where you can send, I think they're called super chats, and there's also members of the channel. And there are people who send a little bit of money, here and there. Some people every single month, some people a good bit of money. And that helps to keep everything free. And the goal is to keep everything free so everyone around the world can access it no matter what their budget looks like or their income looks like. So for those of you who do send some support, that all goes back into furthering that goal. So thank you. Now let's talk about Psalm 145. Our author is once again David today, but this one is going to end his streak, I believe, because there is not a psalmist mentioned for Psalm 146. So the streak ends here, at least for now. We don't have any New Testament references to Psalm 145. For our themes today, I have 2. Number 1, God is worthy of more worship than we could ever give him. And number 2, God is kinder to us than we will ever deserve. Also, 2 words to define. Some of you are going to know the meanings of these already, but I thought I would throw them in there. Maybe they're not words we use every day, only kind of in churchy circles. But the first word is extol. This is in verse 1 of 145, and it just means to praise with enthusiasm. And then number 2, dominion. It appears in verse 13. This is the power to control or the right to rule. We're going to talk about God's dominion over all things. Our chapter today has 21 verses. I almost broke them down into 2 sections, but I ended up keeping it all as one in the end. So verses 1 through 21, I've entitled it, Declaring the Goodness and the Greatness of God. So Psalm 145 is really just a psalm of worship, full of worship. David blessed the Lord for his great power, but also for his kind nature. David wrote how he meditated on God's wonderful works and on his splendor, even though he knew that God's greatness was just beyond what any human could ever appreciate. And David wasn't the only one who admired God. There were other people as well. Other men sang of the fame of God's goodness and his righteousness. And David wrote, quote, "The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love." And that's verse 8. David said that God's reign, his kingdom over all things will last forever. And all of God's saints and all of his creation will proclaim the glory of their everlasting king. David, was a temporal king. He was going to be king for a while, and then he'd die and he'd be replaced by somebody else. God's reign isn't like that, though. God is king forever and ever. He is above all, ruling over all forever and ever. And that's still true today. Actually, today, this video I think will come out tomorrow, but when I'm recording this today is Inauguration Day in the United States. And so we are bringing in a new president. We're getting a new ruler. And that's how human rulers are. They're constantly going in, they're constantly going out. Not like that with God. And that's really good news for those of us who have our trust in the Lord, because he's never going anywhere, and we're never going to end up with, a bad election or a bad ruler taking the throne or something like that. God is good all the time. God is not just glorious and powerful, but he's also very kind. And we see that in some of these last verses in the Psalm. Psalm 14, or verse 14 through 20, speak about God's gentleness and his care for the needy. God provides food for the hungry. He helps those who have stumbled, and he preserves those who love him. It says in verse 17, "The Lord is righteous in all his ways and kind in all his works." I really like that verse. David then concludes the psalm in verse 21, encouraging everyone everywhere to worship the Lord. He writes, "My mouth will speak the praise of the Lord, and let all flesh bless his holy name forever and ever." So there you have it, a Psalm of David, Psalm 145. Let's now talk about our application. I think in Psalm 145, David does a really good job at balancing something that many churches and Christians struggle with. He balances the glory and the greatness of God with the kindness and the gentleness of God. In my experience, this is a balance that every Christian must work hard to find. It takes a lifetime of study, putting aside our biases and our preconceived ideas to begin to see God properly, with the appropriate balance of his characteristics as they're presented to us in the scriptures. Some people overemphasize the holiness of God, for example, to a fault, making him out to be like an unapproachable deity. Some people overemphasize the approachableness of God to a fault, presenting him as no more to be respected than say, one of our peers or our family members. The Bible is where we're going to find the balance between these two extremes. Reading all of what God has said about himself is our best way to understand him properly. We need to read all of the scriptures, and we need to read it repeatedly. A lot of times people have this skewed view of God because they've created him out of something other than the scriptures. Their understanding of him is formed by something other than the scriptures, and they're not spending enough time in God's actual word, the things he said and told us about himself, and they're getting their information from somewhere else. So we need to come back to the scriptures. That will help us find the balance.